afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first after lunch session. I hope everyone had a coffee, keeping awake. And the name of our panel is the NFT question. Can in-game NFTs create value for players and developers? We're very lucky to be joined today by Benish Shah, Aziz Hasan, Canaan Linder, and Jan Roessner. And I will let them introduce where they work, although I have all of that on here as well. Thanks, you guys. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So everybody who's sitting on that side, I'm going to warn you, I have like kindergarten teacher tendencies, so I'll say things like, everyone can move in closer if you want. And then when you don't, I'll just keep saying it randomly. So move in closer. Good on you, person in orange. But just to kick it off, my name is Benish. I'm the VP of Marketing at Stardust. I have a background in media, politics, law, and I've pretty much worked in every industry right in its nascency, so I'm excited to be in Web3 now. Aziz, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'm a creative executive and also an illustrator. I actually was the CEO of Kickstarter for the last 3 years. Just recently left, so I'm taking a bit of the summer and enjoying it.
Hi, excuse me, I'm Canaan. I'm the CEO of Stardust. I have been in the NFT space for about 4.5 years now. Previously worked as a software engineer at Bloomberg here in New York City, so excited to be here and excited to see the growth of NFTs in the gaming industry in general.
Thank you very much. My name is Jan Roessner. I'm from One Earth Rising. I'm the CEO and co-founder. And the space of Web3 we just entered. We're coming from the original core gaming world of PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, Xbox. So very excited about these new opportunities. And yeah, excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And excited to share my views.
Great. So the idea here will be that we want to keep it as a conversation as much as possible. And then I'll run through a few questions, and I'm going to open it up to everybody else. So if you have any questions, just hold them till the end, and we'll kick it off. So, I mean, let's just get this out of the way, which is not everybody is a fan of blockchain or NFTs. And when we look at the media and when we're reading the articles that are out there about how NFTs are kind of destroying gaming, talk us through that. Like, you guys have all worked in this space. You've worked both in gaming, you've worked in blockchain. How do you think NFTs or blockchain is going to positively or negatively impact the gaming space?
All right. So let's, I will start. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the current climate around NFTs and blockchain is vicious, and there's really not a lot of love in the gaming space, also other creators space. I think we are in the very beginning of the technology, and there has been a lot of misuse of the technology. The technology itself is amazing what you can do with it, and there were just a whole bunch of bad players that took advantage of the moment and led many people into losing their money and being frauded, right? And so it's up to us to take that up and pick it up and really make it better.
So, Kenan, when you mentioned the technology is amazing, what is the technology? If it's not an NFT, it's not a JPEG, what is it?
Yeah, so I guess building off what Jan said, the technology itself is just an open and interoperable system that allows game developers to compose and create games on top of one another, and players to take pervasive items across different games and continue to build profiles as they go from game to game. And it's very simple, and I think building off of what you said as well, if you look back to the dot-com boom, it's really no different, right? It was over-speculated. People lost a lot of money in the year 2000 and 2001, but the over-speculation did not diminish the value that the underlying technology brought. And I think we're seeing the same thing here, which is there will be long-term sustainable growth in the usage of blockchain technology and how it can benefit everybody in the gaming industry and beyond.
Yeah, I think kind of building off of kind of what you're both saying, I think the challenge and maybe the opportunity that I see here is like we're too focused on the technology. And what I just mean by that is I think where technology really shines is when it's used in service of a purpose, of a point of view, of an outcome that you want to benefit, whether it's a small group of people, a greater society, or something for novelty and fun. And so right now I feel like the technology, the curiosity, the interest in it will drive you to be experimental, to try a bunch of things, to be kind of on all sides of the spectrum with it. And my curiosity really is like, when this technology is, even more in the hands of people who are just able to play with it, what are the natural kind of use cases or problems that get solved? That's when we start to see, I think, technology and kind of the magic of it. The early days, though, I agree with you both. It's tough. A couple people feel like they get savvy. They try to do something with it. It's not so savory. And then, slowly, I think the people who have a point of view, who want to do something interesting, start to leverage the technology for those outcomes. And that's when I think you start to see that shift.
So going back to that, right, what would be the ideal outcomes, right? So if we're thinking about this in the gaming space, it's a pre-existing subculture. This has existed for as long as we can think. It has different iterations. When you think about blockchain technology or just the idea of really the next phase of gaming, because again, there's too much focus on the word NFT or blockchain, what's the outcome that we would want that's going to be beneficial to this space?
Yeah.
Sure, I think the most beneficial outcome that we're starting to see today in specific instances is game developers building more than just a single game, but building a game as part of a larger ecosystem. And you hear that, sensationalizes the metaverse and all of this stuff, but I'll take an example of Axie Infinity. The economics aside for a second. They have a whole Axie Builders program. And so they actually work with many indie game developers, I think 10 to 15 a quarter, to build games for players that own Axies. And so you're starting to see not only one game for Axies and one game for another intellectual property and another, but rather a whole suite of games and innovation surrounding a set of characters. And I think as we continue to grow this industry, the successes of these ecosystems will be dictated by those that can really create development communities around their original game and their intellectual property and items within that original game to build off of and create a larger ecosystem for.
Yeah, I would love to add to this, and I love the point that you made also earlier today in your speech. You were talking about the creator economy, and that's exactly where this whole new world leads us, where we have the ability to not only add more and more games to a universe or metaverse, we have the ability to also just add content to existing games and content to games that are being developed in the future, just offering entirely new ways to create games. Game designers think of new ways to tackle the whole game design and creation of a game. You send a character into a corporate, into a partner game, and that will unlock in your original game another level, or it will impact your character. And you just have the interoperability between all these different worlds that will actually impact your gameplay. It's a new way of thinking of the creation of games. That gets me super excited. And then just wanted to add to Aziz's point also, absolutely right. We need to get to the point where this is the Intel inside, the engine in your car. You don't think about it, you just drive it and use it.
So Aziz, you and I have talked about this before, this idea of interoperability. How do you convince game developers to do this? Because in reality, like what you're asking them is you're saying, hey, you have a closed ecosystem where you're making all the money and you have all the control and they're your users. Now we're asking you to open that up and let other people be part of it. How do you convince them?
I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on game developers, but what I will say is I think if you think about the way that people create and like this idea of like collaboration and connection is so human and so like intrinsic. So I think that the motivation kind of lies inside of it. The question is like, what have we layered on top of our human instinct to incentivize us to be closed systems, to hold tightly to the things that we have, and how do you disrupt some of that? One thing just to the question or the kind of topic you posed before, and just to play contrarian a little bit here is like, I actually don't think we have to have an outcome or what this technology is like meant to do or the ideal. And the only reason that I say that is just what happens when you make the technology usable and accessible to as many people as possible with, I think, a reasonable set of guardrails, right? And that around safety, harm, things like that. And then don't have an outcome in mind and see what happens as a result of people playing and tinkering. Because I think it is difficult to plan what that future might be. And when you think about like emergent design, what happens is you sort of put it into the system, and you start to see what develops, and then as you see what develops, then you start to form communities around it or ideas. And so just throwing it out there just to say that there are, I think, many ways that we can leverage technology in like a really meaningful way that may not always start with our ends and may start with something a little bit more open.
Yeah, no, I think point is well taken there. I think you can't really push a wave in the direction you want. And starting 4.5, 5 years ago, part of the best part about it is the unknown, right? And understanding where it goes and leveraging wherever it goes to best help the people in that direction. Back to the original question about how do you, I don't want to say force, but convince game developers to go in this direction. It's the innovator's dilemma, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't, and that's how a lot of larger developers are looking at the space. They understand this is the future, but it's not necessarily broken, so they don't know why they need to fix it. The opportunity here is to really start that messaging within those disenfranchised groups. So, you know, indie, smaller game developers who are exponentially hurt both by not having access to larger scale ecosystems or by technological changes such as IDFA and iOS 14.5. And that's really where this grassroots movement starts. And that's why, going back to mobile, the incumbents in the industry, you know, Supercells, et cetera, the world, they weren't there previously. And so there will be a couple large new players that come from this disenfranchised group that adopts this technology early.
So with, I mean, bringing up the iOS changes, right? What essentially that's doing, and I don't know if everybody here is familiar with this, but in the last 10 years, marketing has heavily relied on acquisition, which is just a fancy way of saying we're going to pay to get people to use our game, our whatever tool, everything else. And it's actually taken, it's made marketing both simplistic, but also a lot more difficult. In this new world, where it's becoming increasingly more difficult to acquire new users, how are we, like, when you're talking to game developers, when you're talking about, you know, implementing blockchain technology into the games and saying that, look, now you're going to acquire new users, they're worried about the fact that, like, game players are going to say no because they're on blockchain. So, like, again, what we're asking them to do is take a pretty big risk. Why?
Well, I think it comes down back again to the conversation around education and even creating a whole new vernacular around the conversation, really moving away from NFTs and blockchain and all of that. We're, as you said, Aziz, talking way too much about the technology itself. We should talk more about the benefits, right? And so we had this conversation with a couple of game developers, asking them, do you want to integrate NFTs in your game? They're like, no, no. Do you want to have your players own your game assets, your characters? Like, yeah, that would be cool. They can do whatever they're, same thing, right? So it's just a different way of asking the question. So I think that is the key to help the developers and also the players to understand, wow, that is a huge benefit. I can actually own the character that I love so much and bring it into another game, or don't. But even if, you know, the example of World of Warcraft, you played for 10 years, you spent thousands of dollars and thousands of hours. If Activision decides to shut it down, you own nothing. Everything is gone. So now this is really your asset. You can keep it, you can play it, you can give it to somebody else. It's kind of yours. You do whatever you want with it. That's great. That's the future.
So explain that to a game player, right? So I'm a game player. I'm not. If anybody's curious, I'm not one. When Canaan was hiring me, I was like, are you sure? We understand this. But really explain that to a game player, right? Which is, if Activision shuts down my game and I have all these assets that I own, what do I do with that? Is it memorabilia? Like, what is it?
Well, it can, okay. You can obviously there's multiple ways. You look at the space right now. What people are also collecting, right? Collecting even physical games still. Majority of collectors in that game space are physical game owners, and so you can have your collection. You can build it. You can then obviously when the space is there that we are creating, that you can put it into another game effectively and continue playing that character in a different game environment. You can just hold on to it, you can sell it, you can give it to somebody else, you can make a business out of it. You can actually own that character and make money from it if you want to. If you're a good gamer and you level up your character, somebody's interested in buying it, there's an actual legitimate system now in place that allows you to do that.
Yeah, I think building off of that, right now, items are locked into games. And so we think about the game experience as kind of one, where you have the item and you have the game. I mean, talk about a personal example, you know, in RuneScape, shut down RuneScape Classic, had a couple of party hats, was very mad. But if you separate the two, right, where the players start owning the items, the games become experiences around these items. And so one game shutting down, the original game shutting down, really has nothing to do with the items that you own, because again, going back to the Axie example, there are 50 games that use, alarm, 50 games that use World of Warcraft mounts, right? And so from that perspective, right, like the original game shutting down is nice and all, but chances are many of those players have already transitioned to another. So that's definitely interesting. And I think going back to the original point in question, focusing on the benefits that brings to a player. Not like NFTs, cool, right? Make money, cool. But rather, you know, you can use this item in 50 different games. And so you don't have to just be stuck playing one for the rest of your life, and not want to start another because you'll lose all your progress. But instead, you can continually build on that. Another good example I like to give is how many people watch streamers? You know, Twitch, you know, anything like that. You know, and I loved baseball growing up, not much anymore, but I would go and ask baseball players to sign a baseball. And we've never had a system in which a streamer can sign a digital good. Like a streamer can sign a sword that you can use in game. That is a benefit that this technology can bring. When exposed, people are like, oh, that's really awesome. I can have, like, you know, Ninja sign my Fortnite skin. And that is a benefit of this technology, but it's not the technology itself.
Yeah, I think one thing when you think about how to frame maybe the opportunity, I'm a product guy and design guy at heart, so I'll always go back to like kind of human psychology behind this, which is like we do this in the real world, right? We take things that represent totems of parts of our lives, parts of our identity, and we carry them around with us. And then when people come to see us and we're either wearing them, carrying them, they come into our homes and we say, hey, look at this thing, I got this baseball when I was at this place. Like these forms of actually what kind of become our own IP is something today in the digital space is more difficult to carry with you, right? And so I see an opportunity inside the kind of underlying technology of like allowing you, I think, as an end user for the first time to really own and carry your IP and your sense of identity with you across a digital space. And that's very new, but the human behavior has existed for, you know, forever.
Yeah.
One very short, the nerd in me, the gamer nerd in me is like envisioning these layers where you can just invite your friends and you have all your tokens lined up there, like in Snow Crash, right? They're really showing off all the assets that you earned and gained and leveled up and so forth. So yeah, exactly, I love this.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we talk about a lot when we are at conferences is that this is not new behavior, to your point, right? Both in game and in real life and outside of game, which is this idea that people have assets that they own or they've earned, whether it's a trophy or something in game or a baseball, and you can sell it or you can trade it or you can gift it. It's the same behavior. It's just that we're saying that we're bringing it on like more of a digital ledger through blockchain technology. But with that, I'm going to open it up to everybody else so you guys can ask questions. Please don't make me point. We talked about my kindergarten teacher tendencies. They're very real. And I'm going to...
Oh, we almost
Almost out of hand, yeah.
Please.
You mentioned that like people are really tied up on the technology and things of that nature, but it could do a lot of other things that we haven't even thought of yet. Can you give us examples of like really novel applications of NFTs that are completely different than how it's typically used today?
Please. Yeah, so I talked a little bit about streamers, cryptographically signing digital goods. That's one I'm super hyped on. Another one is fractionalization. So I'll get a perfect example of this in Second Life, right? There's a piece of land where 90 people run it, and it earns $3 million a year. It's actually fascinating because the capital requirements of that underlying piece of land, it's really expensive, and they're like, economies within the game have failed because sometimes the assets become too valuable for the mainstream user. For example, one of the most interesting things that I've seen, taking a real-world application, if you guys know what a REIT is, a real estate investment trust. So you take a very expensive piece of land that has a lot of owners and operators on it, and you fractionalize it so the average person can invest in it. Now, I think this goes back to a little bit of speculation, but as we talk about digital land and some of the hype around it, and I think there's too much hype, but that's a different story, right? The ability for, let's say in New York City, right, for REIT, the real estate investment trust, to purchase a skyscraper and then gets paid back by the offices or whatever within it, you can start doing that in a digital world. And I think that application of real-world finance within that digital domain is awesome. And that's probably one of the kind of most novel ways I've seen to look at it. A little out there, but novel nonetheless.
Something that I'm just like super hyped about is using these tools to just do a lot more kind of creative collaboration. That like by nature, I love to collaborate, love to make stuff with people, and so like I love the idea that like the four of us here could create something together. Maybe I'll give you a real example. I have these squids that I draw, and like I would love to know like how you guys might remix those squids, and then like the fact that there could be this connection on that asset long term that people could see, they could see like the story of that collaboration, like that stuff gets me excited because I think right now I look at these things as like ways to break down barriers. Like it's hard right now to go like find the person, talk to them, but the fact that like the whole world is technically open to connect with, and that these tools kind of allow me to find somebody in Japan who might want to like work with me on something like this, and actually for them to have attribution, actually for us to have connection. It just sounds like that could be fun.
I got one more point. I'm going to steal it for a second, because you reminded me of a great point. I was talking earlier this morning, but a lot about intellectual property, and the reason that derivative works a lot of the times are struck down is because the original copyright holder does not make any money off that. When you get into the blockchain world, the attribution system, and effectively blockchain being a financial system as well, means that derivative works are much more appreciated because they can actually generate revenues for the original holder. For example, any derivative, we'll call it squid, can actually generate revenue as people trade it on a secondary market, and some of that royalty stream can go back to the original creator that was based upon. And I think that's also fascinating because attribution is extremely hard in the Web2 space, but as you get toward more of a programmatic ecosystem, it becomes a lot easier.
So bringing that back to Games for Change, the idea of it creating social impact as well, right? So you're allowing and you're opening up space for people who may not have access prior to this to suddenly have access to get their work out there and then continuously make money on it, and also continue to get the recognition that it was their work to begin with, which is increasingly hard to do when you don't have the resources to do that.
Perfect segue. This is exactly what I wanted to add, that the actual impact component. I mean, there's, you use smart contracts that are not changeable when they're deployed. And to Canaan's point, there's always something coming back to the originator or the party that you added to that. So let's say a nonprofit. So, and you can use these assets to put them out there, game assets, characters, drawings, whatever it is. And by just having them owned by other people and then maybe secondary market sales, everything, there's always a kickback back to the original organization / the nonprofit organization that you're putting in there. So these assets can have real world impact by you just owning them, trading them, playing around with them, and just create that. So as a matter of fact, so this annuity for change, basically, that is constant kickbacks to these nonprofit organizations. If you go to my Twitter handle right now, we have like a little Elementon thing that you can claim, and that's free. And if you sell it, it goes back to nonprofit organizations, things like that. That's a real case impact way to use NFTs like that.
Hey there, you said nonprofit, and my light bulb went up. Brad and I here work for Red. It's a global nonprofit. We do product collaborations. If you've heard of the product, Red iPhone, that's us. We work with Louis Vuitton, et cetera.
Heard about it, yeah.
Yes, cool, yes. I'm on business development, brands on digital here. We've recently got into the gaming space. We have our own property now. It's a creator company. We do a Minecraft tournament with different creators, et cetera. We've also started getting NFTs. We work with Artesia, which is a blockchain company, and Binance, which is a secondary marketplace. I guess my question for you, A, is any advice on how nonprofits can get further into this world? And then B, I'm really intrigued by this question of value, right? Causing value for players. I think you mentioned as the moderator that one of the challenges is getting developers to accept an NFT of the game. I'd love to understand what role can nonprofits play in maybe creating more value, making it easier for developers to say yes. Like, how can we get in on the impact? How can nonprofits come into the space and make it easier? Or how can we get involved?
Yeah, so the short answer on the first question is just come to us and talk to us.
Great.
And we'll definitely help you on that one. But yeah, can I give you the second one?
Sure. I was going to plug my Twitter handle, but that's okay. You beat me to it. Sure. So on the nonprofit side of, I think it's important for every NFT to also have an application within a game. So I think it's important that you guys create NFTs for change, etc. But my question would be, okay, there's this NFT. How can we get every game developer, every indie game developer that we work with, leveraging that NFT in their own game in its own way, so that can have actual value? And I say that not because I want to make it into a speculative asset, but because going back to something we were saying about royalty streams, and every time it's traded or sold, etc., money can go back to the original nonprofit and the cause. I think that's super important. And I'll take, crap, I forget the actual, similar thesis to iPhone Red, but originally there was like a, I'm going to call it a Fitbit equivalent, where you could buy like a green Fitbit to go to this change and a red Fitbit. Yeah, I think very something similar, where if you guys created a set of NFTs that all had different attributes and different nonprofits, and then part of that BD process on that end, just like you got Apple to come out with a product for it, to go to different games and say, hey, could you leverage this inside your game? We'll cross-promote it. You become part of this collective organization, Games for Change, effectively, right? To use that word in there. And every time it's used within a game, traded, bought, sold by any one of your partner games, you're getting kickbacks from it to the nonprofit. I think that is what I would suggest, right? There's a lot of the NFTs today are just like, we create and we're done, right? And that loses the network effect. Your job for the nonprofit is to have that item used in as many games as possible.
So essentially creating your own IP through producing an NFT, but
Correct.
leveraging it across different games.
Correct, and that in itself is a BD process,
Interesting.
right?
Okay.
At Stardust, it's something we would love to help with.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Just one thought too there is that, one side of NFTs, we talk a lot about the economic side of it, right? But it can be leveraged to unlock utility. And so I think there's a question and an opportunity to be really creative with what that utility looks like. Does it have to only sit on an economic front, or does it open access? Does it, kind of reveal something different? Does it transform? Like, I think that there's a pretty big playground there. And what I would say, at least from my perspective, where nonprofits are fantastic, is you're actually going to be the ones to change the metrics, right? Like, be able to actually put the actual deep thought behind what is value, how do you want to define it, how do we define it outside of an economic system only. And so the combination, I feel like, of those two things, a different definition of success and value, using these tools to unlock different types of use, utility, interaction, engagement, connection, starts to create a totally different layer inside of games, inside of the way that people connect. So I only say that because I think don't allow kind of the current environment to limit how you might think about using the tool, and that actually you're more in control in how you might want to see the outcomes happen than what the technology is kind of directing itself towards.
I would also add to that and say, like, it's the same as productization of physical goods, right? Which is what Red has been so amazing at for so long. And the idea being that if you productize it within games, but then you also have the real world utility of it, which is, by earning the Red asset in X number of games, does that give you access to something else that Red's going to do? And I think nonprofits can leverage that, especially ones that are national and international and have that brand affinity already. Then you leverage that to make it bigger than just the one-time use thing that a lot of other people are doing.
It's really interesting. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, well, sorry, one thing I just want to build on that with is like if you think about the opportunity here as like, kind of user or community like owned or operated, right? And to Benish's point, like, enough people gain, the Red, asset, and that actually gives them some agency in like what type of change they're enacting, and that you're the conduit to make that happen. You're the ones actually putting that into the world, but folks are kind of voting through that, or they're incentivizing, or they're showing their interest. Like, that's really powerful. 100,000 people that say like, no, we want to see this change happen in the world.
Sure.
And you actually have the opportunity right now the opportunities that come with NFTs, as we hear here, is they're so much bigger than what was possible before. So we've worked with animal rights organization PETA. We worked with All Hands and Hearts. We built games for them and with them, and so that's a much more elaborate process, as you can imagine, and that's basically what you're stuck with. However, now with NFTs and all the technology around that, the metaverse solutions, you can actually implement just touch different games and bring all those different games together and have your element, your IP, being represented there. And it's so much easier to deploy that. And to your point also, creating these leaderboards and creating more impact through these leaderboards. We are about to release a metaverse solution which we call the Purposeverse, which we have these impact score attached to that. So the more you work in these games, your more impact is created, you're ranking up in your leaderboards. And that can then be represented to a specific organization and be displayed anywhere you want it, even UN level.
I think we have time for one more question. Anyone? Go for it.
Yeah, you mentioned, and I was sort of really curious about this idea of using NFTs to sort of track transformation and to promote collaboration. I was like, what the inverse of that might be if you want something that's truly immutable. And one of the problems with digital content is because it's so easy to change it from its original message and its original purpose. Is there a place for NFTs to sort of create that sense of like, this is mine, and if it's altered, then it will tell on you, or something like that?
I mean, I'll be totally honest, I don't know. and I would say, and I say it because, you know, when new tools and new technology come out, the hype around it is easy to get kind of, you know, excited about and lost in. And I think you don't know the answers to those questions until like the real world applications start to happen. So I am hopeful, I am curious about that. I am deeply curious to see how people are going to use it. And the folks that really want to utilize the technology to that, I think my underlying question is like, how do we rally enough of the kind of human behavior patterns to actually be the kind of most obvious use case of technologies like this? You know, to be able to actually see it demonstrated enough times that you believe that that actually is one of the primary, you know, ways in which you can use the technology. So I don't really know, but I'm really, really excited and curious because I think it feels it's closer at grass than it has been, and I think that in itself is very exciting.
I don't think we'll ever stop iterations of work. I mean, you know, right-click save will always be a thing, whether it be online, physical, digital, whatever it is. I think from two different angles, this gives digital authenticity, which means you can always tell which one is the real, unique, and original, which is very interesting. And then I think from the other end, for those that do want to embrace the change, they can get unique attribution in a digital world. I don't think there's ever a way to stop people, you know, across the board from manipulating your work to how they see fit. I just think either you know the original, which we do, and you know how to take advantage of those, you know, in a good sense, and collaborate with those that have manipulated the original. So, yeah, it's a good way of saying you can't ever stop that from happening.
Sure. I mean, but the idea that you can track what is real versus what is not real.
Of course, yeah. Oh, it's yeah.
It's kind of hard to do right now, especially with other competing technologies like deepfakes and you know, other ways in which people can make something that looks very real.
Yeah, very much so. Actually, there's an interesting line in the Gucci movie about how rip-off Gucci bags actually contribute more to the original Gucci brand because they want to give those that can't afford them a way to feel like they do. And so I think there's been a lot of polar opposites on how we look at derivative works and quote-quote fakes, but you know, just embracing them rather than completely you know, hating them, I think is interesting and becoming more prevalent with this model.
Great. I wanted to say thank you to our panelists, and thank you to everyone who came. And they are going to hang out for the next few minutes if anybody actually wants to come up and not ask questions publicly like I asked you guys to. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you.